Good evening, everybody. It's Sunday night once again. And as I've said before, I'll say again, there's no better place to be than one, and that is when we all get to heaven. But until then, I appreciate you being here with me, and I'm glad that you are giving me time in your house. Tonight, we're going to wrap up, if you will, the our study in Hebrews. We studied how Jesus is a better high priest, a better sacrifice, a better messenger, and he says better than anything else because he is the Son of God. And tonight we're going to look at the importance of obeying him, or the importance of obedience, if you will. So tonight, that's what we're going to look at. The need for obeying God in religion. There's a need to obey God in the religious world. A lot of times we hear people talk about their church that they go to, and once you get talking to them, you kind of wonder who are they following. Who are they patterning themselves after? Because some of the things they say and some of the things that they do, you kind of have to wonder, are they really a Christian? And so we see there's a need, even in our own lives, for obeying God's word. The word obedience means submission. And submission to a law or to an ordinance of laws. And, that's just something that we don't like, that word submit or submission. It's just something that we don't like. And it seems to be true in our society today. There seems to be a lot less people wanting to submit to any law, much less God's law. But obedience to God is supposed to be a willing submission to his laws. Also, Jesus saves those who obey him, and not those that think they have. Those who think they have faith alone will save them, or join some church, or they feel like for some reason they have religion. And so we're going to look at a couple of examples here in a little bit for obedience. As I said before, the word obey simply means to submit or be in submission. For those of you who has a driver's license, which that seems to be a lot of us, we are to submit ourselves to the laws that pertain when we're driving, that pertain to transportation, driving a vehicle. That speed zone sign up there that may say 65, 70, 75 in some areas, or 45. That's just not a suggestion. That's supposed to be the top amount of speed that you can go at any particular time. Or if you join the military, there are certain rules that you have to submit yourself to. You swear that you take an oath that you will obey as far as the rules or the orders, as far as they are constitutionally correct, or they do not violate the Constitution. You swear to obey those things. You submit yourself to what governs the military. And so society itself, if it is to stand, and if it's to be a viable society, in other words, if it takes on if it is prosperous, or if it expects to stand, it has to obey laws. And usually that means laws of the land. And if you do not, then society that's there is not going to stand. And it is no different with God and man. If if you say that you are a Christian or you say that you are a godly person, you are to submit to what God says. The very first command that God gave man is found in Genesis chapter 2, 16 through 17. God says, "From any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat from it, you will surely die." Well, there was a command, wasn't there? And God expected man to obey. God didn't merely throw that out as a suggestion. He didn't just merely say, "Well, if you think about it, don't eat of that fruit. You know, it wouldn't be very good for you to do that." No, God said, "Do not eat of the tree of good and evil." And there was something that came along following that if man disobeyed. And God says, "For in the day that you do, you will surely die." Well, we know the story, don't we? It didn't take long. Well, we're not for sure how long man was in the garden before Satan came along and tempted him. But we know it wasn't very long before Satan tempted man and man ate of that tree of good and evil. And because of that, sin entered the world. Paul in Romans chapter 5:12 says, "Therefore, just as through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned." Romans 3:23, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." Romans, that the wages of sin is death. We need to obey God's word. Point. And that point usually means when they don't like something. They come across something that God says, "Hey, what? I'm not going to obey that one." And so they don't. That's people who really don't want to obey God, isn't? There are those who think they have obeyed God's word. They'll accept God in their heart. They'll say that prayer that everyone says that's all you need to do to obey God is to say a prayer, accept God in your heart, and He'll save you. But that's really not obeying God's word, is it? That really doesn't even get you in the ballpark of obedience. There has to be more than to just faith alone. You know, James says faith without works is dead. And you can't really be a Christian if you think that you talk a good game, but you don't back it up. You know, there are always those who talk a good game, isn't there? There's always those who think that they're doing something really good, but really, when you get down to it and you really talk to them and you really see how they are, that's really all they are. It's just talk. And just belief in God and that God is going to save everybody is really not obedience at all. If that was the case, if all one had to do was to say, "I believe in God and I know God is love, and therefore God will not send me to hell," why would Jesus have to die? I mean, you think about that for a minute. If that's all we had to do, if that's all we had to believe in, what would be the reason for Jesus dying on the cross? Much less coming to this earth, if all we had to do was just believe in God. Well, there are still those who say that they have joined a church. But when you look at what they teach, and when you look at what they say, you kind of wonder if it's really a church at all called out. Because if they don't teach sound doctrine, that's not where to be. If they do not get into the word, and if they do not preach what God says, God's commands, and stand upon those principles of sound doctrine, then it's really not anything to believe in to begin with. Oh, the Bible is very clear about how we should obey. Just feeling like we are obedient and thinking that we're obedient may not mean that we're obedient. We're going to look at a couple examples. And the first one is found in 1 Samuel 15. So turn quickly over to 1 Samuel chapter 15. And it's the story how Saul was to go to battle against the Amalekites. And he, according to God, he was to wipe out every man, woman, and child, not even the animals, not to leave anything. Because the Amalekites were very sinful, and God said, judgment has come, their sin has been fulfilled, and it's time for judgment. Well, Saul goes to fight the Amalekites. But in verse 22 of 1 Samuel chapter 15, Samuel approaches Saul. And Samuel hears something that doesn't sound like it needs to be there. He hears the bleating of the sheep, the calls of the sheep. And Samuel talks to Saul. And Saul says, well, I did go against the Amalekites. I did do what God said to do. And in verse 22 of chapter 15, Samuel says, as the Lord is much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord. Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. You see, Saul told Samuel, the reason why you hear the bleating of the sheep and see the calves and the oxen and stuff like that was the people seeing how good they were, the choices of the flocks, and they kept it for themselves. Samuel saw, I obey God's word. It was these people who didn't do it, but Saul was in charge. He's the king. He's the one that's supposed to set the example. He's the one that's supposed to lay the law down. He's the one that's supposed to make the people obey God's word. And he didn't do it. And so all those animals that they fooled themselves into thinking about bringing back to Jerusalem or bring back to where the tabernacle was, where Samuel was, to offer to God as a sacrifice didn't mean anything to God. We need to remember that. We need to remember all of our good intentions and realize that intentions isn't a substitute for obedience. Another example of disobedience is found in Joshua chapter 7, verses 1. And verses 20 through 26. But in Joshua chapter 7:1, here Israel goes up against the city of Ai and they lose. And they're distraught over the loss because they just came off of Jericho. They didn't even lift a hand to do anything. The walls fell in and the city was theirs. The only thing God said to Israel was, you don't touch anything inside there. The only ones that's going to come out of Jericho was the ones who helped the spies. I can't think of her name right now. You'll have to forgive me. But that was the only thing that was supposed to be leaving Jericho. Nothing else was. It was all to be given to God. But Achan disobeyed God by taking some things that was devoted to God, which was pretty much everything. And he hid it underneath his tent in the earth. And so when they went up against Ai, Israel lost because God seen disobedience in Israel. Even though it was one person kept Israel from taking a city of Ai and made them lose lives. Probably lives that was people that was very obedient to God, but they lost their life because of Achan's disobedience. And later on in verse 20 and 26 of chapter 7, Achan and his whole family perished because of the disobedience of Achan and because they went along with it. So God expects obedience to his word. He doesn't want us to just simply say we will, but he wants us to obey him from the heart. And that is true today, just as it was in the past. If you will, turn to Matthew chapter 21. Jesus there tells a parable about two sons. And the man goes up to the first son, and he asked him to go work in a vineyard, but the son said no, but afterward regretted it and went and worked. The same man goes to the second son and asks him to work, and the son said he would, but he did not go. Jesus asked them a question, which one did the will of the Father? And the answer, the first. And Jesus condemns them then because they recognize obedience, but they did not do it themselves. You see, the Jewish leaders knew the law. They knew the commands. They knew what it was that they were supposed to be doing. But they didn't. Time and time again, they refused those who eagerly hurt because of their sin, and they kept them from obeying the law, or really made it hard for anyone to obey the law because they did not want anyone that they thought was a sinner to be saved. If you was poor and destitute, you done something wrong. If you had some kind of an ailment, if you was blind, or if you was born blind, or if you was crippled, or if you had any kind of disease or any kind of health problem, you was a sinner and you was condemned. And they was quick to condemn that woman that was caught in a very act of adultery, even though that man was never brought forward. But she was caught in a very act of adultery, and they demanded that Jesus do something. And yet, they broke the law themselves. They was disobedience, or disobedient, but they thought that they was okay. Well, after Samuel confronted Saul, Samuel told Saul this: because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. You know, Saul that very day lost the kingdom. No more would it be his. Samuel told Saul that he had already chosen someone that was after his heart, and that he would sit on the throne and be established forever, but not Saul. Because, see, Saul didn't ever really obey God from the heart. Oh, he picked and chose what to obey. He was real quick about getting rid of a witchcraft, but he didn't obey God's word fully because he never really had God in his heart. Achan didn't really pay attention to God's word at all. He scorned God's word. He didn't think that he needed to obey God. Oh, God won't really miss this piece of silver here or gold here. He won't really miss it. I doubt if he even sees. I doubt if God even knows anything about it, and he won't see me. And besides all this that's going on with all the people, surely God will do or will have to do something more important than to worry about me. It kind of reminds me of Ananias and Sapphira, doesn't it? The money that they gave to God, they wanted to make man think that that's all that there was to give. And they gave it all to God. They lied. They disobeyed. The act that Barnabas and others that sold land and pieces of property and they gave the money to the apostles, they did it out of love and out of wanting to help their fellow Christian. But Ananias and Sapphira really did it just to please self, to kind of massage their ego. And it cost them their lives for disobeying. Meaning our disobedience has a recompense or a price. There will be those who think they are saved because they put on Christ at one time, but from then on they never obey God's word or really put God in their heart and obey him from the heart. There'll be a price to pay. The same way with man's authority, if you disobey man's authority, the government, they will get you. And you will pay the price for being a lawbreaker. One way or the other, you will pay that price. And the same is true when we disobey God's word. But while disobedience is discouraged and judgment passed upon those who disobey, obedience is encouraged and rewarded. Turn to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7 in your New Testaments. 11 verse 7 says, by faith Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. You know, Peter in 2 Peter chapter 3 uses Noah as an example himself and states that only 8 people, Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their wives, was all that was saved from judgment upon disobedience in their time. And it was all done because Noah, by faith, when God said, build an ark, did it. Noah didn't ask a question, did he? Noah didn't say, now, wait a minute, God, what are you talking about? What's this flood? What's this rain? What's this judgment thing all about? Surely you're not going to wipe out the whole world. Well, the way of escaping the world was presented to man. All they had to do was come to Noah and ask, what are you doing? And Noah would have told them, I'm building an ark because God says there's going to be a flood because of the disobedience on the earth. And all you have to do to be saved is come back to God and help me. I'm sure God would have made allowance for more people to be saved. But they didn't do it. They simply was like Achan and just did not believe that God would do anything about their disobedience. Maybe they thought that there just wasn't a God at all. Or maybe they just thought God just doesn't care. But God does. And he did And the only one saved was Noah and his family. 8 people. And since God rewards those who obey him, then it's a simple conclusion that God will save those who obey him from eternal destruction. Again, in Hebrews chapter 5, 8, and 9, the writer says, although he was a son, he learned obedience from the things which he suffered, and having been made perfect, he became to all those who obey him the source of eternal salvation, being designated by God as the high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. You know, the ultimate reward for obedience is salvation, but it has to be a willing act from the heart. We're going to close with this passage, Romans 6, 16 through 17. Paul says, do you not know that when you present yourselves to someone as slaves for obedience, you are slaves for the one whom you obey, either of sin resulting in death or of obedience resulting in righteousness? But thanks be to God that though you were slaves of sin, you became obedient from the heart to that form of teaching to which you are committed. You know, when you get right down to it, you and I are going to obey something. We're either going to obey our desires and our heart and wishes, meaning self, meaning sin, or we're going to obey God and his word, meaning we're going to put ourselves aside and we're going to listen to his word and to obey him willingly. Not that it's easy, not that it's ever popular. One day we may be like Noah, who knows? One day we may be like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or Daniel, or Elijah. We may feel alone, but we have God on our side. And no matter what happens, as long as we obey him and obey him to the full extent of his word as much as we can, willingly desiring his approval, that's all that matters. Because we will be saved in the end. Be with him in heaven. That's the importance of obeying God. And tonight, if you are not a Christian, I pray that you put Christ on in baptism for remission of sins before it's too late. Or if there's someone who has wandered away from that lifestyle of putting Christ on and you decided to go back into the world, come back to Jesus before it's too late. The time is now, because you're not promised any other time except today, and really not even all of today. You're just guaranteed right now, and we do not know how long right now is, except it's fleeting compared to eternity. I pray that you are staying healthy, and I pray that someday soon that we will all be gathered together under one roof. But until then, I thank you for allowing me to come into your home once again. God bless. Thank you.